Okay. So welcome everybody. Welcome to the talk, and we're going to get into our little bit of our topic here today. And it is, well, director's cut. I made a movie theme for us to talk about. And I am Michael Browning. I'm the director of the Whitestone Clinic. I think you guys all know me. And I'm going to be speaking today briefly on how to choose a therapist and the importance of cross-client consults. So we'll explain that in just a minute. So the first thing that you want to look for when you guys are looking at therapy is choosing the right fit. I'm sure many of you have had therapists in the past. Some people have never done the therapy, but you get to know the kind of people you can work with. One of the things I would ask a person is, what are your needs and personality? When you have an idea of what you're like, you have an idea of what you would like. And so what kind of therapy or therapist do you like, or what do you like about them? And you may not like therapists, that's okay. But if you do like therapy or therapists, what is it about them you like? What would you be looking for? And keep in mind that it takes roughly 2 to 3 sessions meeting with a therapist to decide if we can be a good fit or not. And so I always say, whenever you're changing therapists or you're changing the modality, so you're going from a individual to a couple file or things like that, and you have a new therapist, give it about 2, 3 tries before making your decision. Now, one thing I realize that's very difficult about that, and I'll just get back to my face for a second, is one of the problems is people are invested for a few $100s already right up front after 2 sessions. But I'm going to tell you, most therapy that goes well and goes for a while for good healing could take 12 to 24 sessions, maybe more. And so although it feels like you're invested already with that person, it's a good idea to take a look and see if it's a real fit or not, because you don't want to be 10 sessions in and feeling like it's still not a fit. So the first 2 or 3 sessions, that's the time to make a decision on whether or not you can work with this person. And we'll explain a little bit more other things that you can do as well. So that's the main thing for this. The next thing that I want to remind you about is there are different modalities to therapy. So almost all therapy is broken down into people who want to get well in an area they feel unwell in. And one of the things that I want to remind you about is that relationships are the first place where you'll see something's not working. So sometimes something could be hidden from ourselves, but when we're in relationship, it often presents itself much more clearly as an issue. So I would say, look at your relationships and look at what's showing up in your relationships as an issue, that maybe that's where we need to go next in our therapy. But here's a couple factors. Is there a partner involved in the first place? Sometimes it's not an issue of involving a partner. If there is a partner or a family member involved, are they willing to see a therapist? If they're not, you've already got your answer, at least for now. Another thing to be concerned about is there one party who's addicted or in trauma? Because if these are the cases, they usually need more individual attention in therapy before it goes into anything else. I'm just letting the next person in. So what I want to encourage you guys about is to think about what your needs are and whether or not couples therapy or individual therapy or group therapy or family therapy, which modality is appropriate at the time that you're in. And you get tons of questions you can ask about that later. And another thing is just to be picky. Be picky with the therapist that you're looking for. That's why at Whitestone Clinic, we have over 10 therapists, because we want to give people options. Read people's bios, look at what approaches they might use, what the therapist professes to use. Also look for the certifications beside their name, look up the certifications, see what they're about. Get a sense, do your research, see if you like the idea of their approach, the different approaches that they use therapeutically. And most importantly, when you do meet with a therapist, either you're calling them on the phone to check them out or it's your first session, talk with your therapist about your preferences. Okay, saying I prefer CBT, or I'm really interested in this somatic approach that you have, or something like that. And if you bring it up, you are the one hiring the therapist, so you're the boss. So please bring that up with the therapist, what it is you're looking for. And it might help you discern that if that therapist is the right fit for you as well. A couple other things, multimodality. So more, especially at the clinic, we use what's called a comprehensive program. So it's somewhere between a typical going to a therapist and going to a rehab. We're in between. So we run programs for a lot of people. There's a lot of people that come to our clinic outside of a program, but a lot of our people are in a program. And it's called comprehensive because it covers multiple areas. So group therapy, individual therapy, couple therapy, family therapy, these are all different modalities that we provide as services for people. And it is possible. We have seen people come in for individual, they end up in a group, their partners in an individual, they end up in a group, they as a couple later come to see, and then they have various levels of the therapy that they're in. So I just encourage you guys, be aware that how you choose therapy is important and who you choose for therapy is important. But we also want to watch for how you can grow through therapy. So personal integration. One time, I mean, once in a while, you'll have an insight, a eureka moment, this aha moment where you caught something. Maybe it's with your individual therapist and you decided, hey, this is really important. I should bring this into my couple file, or I should bring this into the group, or what have you. And that's really an important thing for the client to do, is if you have more than one therapist, to be able to bring that in. Now, I was going to say, watch out for burnout if you're doing too much therapy. And I know some people here, and I know that sometimes you can do a therapy session with your individual therapist, a couple therapy session, maybe even a group therapy, all in the same day. This is a very taxing, very burning way to do things. I would recommend only doing that if you have the day off, but it's usually recommended to spread the therapy out just a little bit. So inform your therapist. When you discover something, let them know and keep a journal. Sometimes it's better when the client keeps a journal about what they've learned in therapy. And there's really nothing wrong in stopping and taking notes while you're in a therapy session. The therapist takes notes, so why shouldn't you? Now I'm going to lead off to this part here, which is about cross-client consults. So cross-client has nothing to do with religion or anything like that. It just means that the client is both a client of one therapist and they share in a certain way with another therapist. Now, I want to warn, this is not usually the case where you have two individual therapists. That usually is unethical. We at the Whitestone Clinic, we don't poach. So if somebody comes in and they have another clinician out there, we want them to stay with a clinician that works for them. But we won't double it up. So if you already have a couple therapists out there, we don't want you coming in to see a couple therapists in here. Okay, so that's not a cross client. A cross client is, let's say you're in the clinic and you are a couple in the therapy session, but one of you sees an individual therapist as well in the clinic. Now, that commonality of that partner, who is both an individual therapy and also in the couple file, is the cross client. And so the individual therapist of that person and the couple therapists will communicate with each other. Usually that's automatic or on request, depending on your circle of care and the consent that you've given. So when you give consent for the therapists to talk to each other, they're helping to share those eureka moments or warning moments. And actually, it's been very helpful for a lot of clients to quicken their therapy success. So it's always good to have that possibility. If you're multimodal, you have more than one file, that's a very important thing, the cross-client consults. Okay, somebody keeps bumping in and out, but hopefully they'll get back in. And also, I just want to remind people about outside professionals. There's often the case, not always, but often enough, where we have people who come into the clinic as a client, but they are seeing somebody on the outside. So we call it the outside professional. And there's a difficulty in getting cross-client consults in those cases. I mean, sometimes they're motivated, but often motivation's quite low for those therapists. I meant to write herding cats, not herding sheep, but anyway, whatever. The idea is to get them to set up a time and an appointment when they're already so busy and seeing clients, paying clients. It's hard for them to take time out of that schedule to meet with another therapist to update on a file, especially if it's more for that other therapist's file than for their own file. So sometimes they might charge an extra fee. And sometimes it's a discovery that you've got incompatible training or approaches. So for instance, this happens to us a lot where we believe in addictions, especially process addictions, but people are coming from other therapies where they have a stated belief that there is no such thing as, say, sexual addiction. So now we have a contradiction between the two, where one person's treating as though addiction doesn't exist, and maybe in an individual file, and then the couple's in a session where they're getting help for having a sexual addiction problem. So that's something to be aware of when we're doing outside professionals and getting your therapists to work together. So the short talk, like I said, a final thing to just to consider is please be picky. Be picky when you are choosing your therapist. And if you have a therapist right now that you're not too pleased about, have a conversation with them and tell them what you're liking, what you're not liking, and see if you can adjust that therapeutic relationship. But be picky when you start off with especially when you start off with a therapist, you're interviewing them. They're the prospective hire that you're going to make. And another thing is please be open. Allow communication between your therapists, particularly to allow people to talk to each other, because that goes the longest way for progressing your file. Okay, so let me just see here. We're going to open it up to questions. So what I'm going to invite you to do is, I got two people here from the same name. Let's see what that means. Okay, so what I'm going to invite you guys to do in just a second is to type in any question. Now, the question does not have to be about what I talked about here. The question can be about anything, okay? Hopefully nothing too personal about me. But basically, somebody says they love my beard. Well, thank you very much. It's got, it's making up for something that's not lacking up here. But yeah, comments of my beauty are okay, but I would appreciate any questions that you have for anything to do with psychotherapy. I'm here to answer your questions. Just type it into the chat box and I'd be glad to answer them, okay? Keep it anonymous that way. If not, I'll start speaking about other things, but I want to give you guys a chance just to ask a question or two. And like I said, it can be about what is therapy selection like. It can be about, hey, Michael, I have this question. Me and my partner are going through such and such, that kind of thing. So we have a good question coming in is, what does a person do when they have a buildup of urges, and how to control these things? And the first thing that I would say is we all face different urges, right? Sometimes on a compulsive or addictive level, and sometimes it's on a completely other level. One of the things I would say is an urge is often a movement within the body, okay, to get you to seek a kind of consolation or escape or soothing, to appeal to one of the appetites, something like that. And one of the things about that is there's usually a good reason for it, but sometimes it gets substituted. It gets substituted into what's the way to put it? Into an unhealthy avenue. So, for instance, there's an acronym called HALT: hungry, angry, lonely, tired. And HALT is a good reminder for people that if you are feeling one of those states, being hungry, angry, lonely, or tired, you're at high risk of acting out in an addiction. So if your addiction is, say, with pornography or something like that, and you're halting, then you're likely to move into looking at pornography itself. And so I just would say the easiest way to look at that is to first identify what lies underneath it. I'll give you an example. Most of the time, pornography is a search for connection. It's a very simple statement, but I think it's very true. It's a search for connection. And so if there, it's the opposite of connection, because A, it's secretive usually, it's compulsive, it's somebody reaching out, but to somebody who's not really there, because they're on a screen or on paper or something. And when you're trying to connect with them, you're really just connecting with yourself, and that could be self-stimulation and that kind of thing. So it's really an ultimate aim of trying to connect, but it's a very maladapted form of connection. So when you realize that, you go, wait a second, I'm feeling sexually charged right now, and I want to kind of go and look at pornography. Oh, I need to go and call a friend. I need to get out of this space that I'm in and be connected with somebody else. Maybe just sit beside them, have coffee, call them up, meet them somewhere, whatever. And often that'll do the trick. That'll help you with the urge. When you try to white knuckle it and you hold it so tight, you're trying to fight, that kind of thing just builds up the intensity until you act out most of the time. Because you're not getting a connection with another human being, you're isolating, trying to fight. So I would say that's my simple answer that was asked for. And now I'm going to give you guys a couple more questions that came in. Thank you for those. The next question I had that came in here is, so a comment here, I believe it's important to have both individual and couples therapy and to really check that the therapist has sex addiction expertise. That's very true, actually. If you're dealing with these issues and the person does not have proper training, you get a lot of dismissiveness. We have in our clinic a lot of what we call therapy refugees. So these are people who've gone to therapy somewhere else and they've come into the clinic after their hiatus into an unfortunate experience in therapy. If the person doesn't have the proper training, they can be very dismissive of things like the addiction itself or how much impact it has on the partner. Those are both very unhealthy. So yeah, do your research, make sure the couple therapy and individual therapy match. They have to match pretty well with therapists that get the same kind of ideas. They can be different in certain approaches, but I do want you guys to do your research for that. Another thing here, I'm just going to go down. I'm aware of CBT, but what are other general methods? Oh, good question. Other general methods of therapy that are available. Great question. There are hundreds of approaches. You will hear the main ones in the media. You will hear the main ones in most web pages. CBT is cognitive behavioral therapy, which is one of the more popular ones. They're usually into several categories. One is theoretical, and the other one is what they would call tested. So you'll often see it's a sort of a more scientific approach to it to try to prove its effectiveness. So you can have different forms of psychoanalyses. You can have psychodynamics. So you can have different names under those psychodynamic approaches, Bowian or attachment-centered ones. You can have Alderian. You can have different things like that. You have Gestalt, which is using a lot of other forms of looking at body language and stuff and involving that in therapy. The list really goes on and on. So what I would just suggest is if you do a search on the internet for, various forms of therapeutic approaches or theories of therapy, you'd see a whole list of things. But most of the time, ask your therapist what their approaches are. Most of them are eclectic. But when a therapist says they're eclectic, you want to say, well, what's your more dominant form? Like for me, a more psychodynamic for the most part. But I'm also very what we call task-centered therapy. So it's about directing and pushing for behavior to be done in order to correct the course. So there's a little more directive than normal. So ask your therapist what approach they use, and then involve like your research on that topic to see if it's interesting to you. Another comment we have is my partner has not spoken to myself or our son in over 9 months since letting me discover about his sex addiction with both sexes. So in swingers clubs, we were being ghosted and left to die. It's a horrible situation. And one of the things I would suggest about that is this is about that person's brokenness. Yes, you are experiencing brokenness in that happening to you, but it is about their brokenness, and they're acting in very unhealthy attachment ways. So they're complete avoidant. And by being avoidant that way, they're pushing you and your son out of the picture. But I'm going to say mostly that's for people who are not facing their own shame. So when the person doesn't face their own shame, they can't face you. And if a person can start to face their own shame, they can engage with their relationship. They can engage with you as a person. But when they're not engaging with themselves as a person, they're not able to do that with others. So it's a horrible example, and I'm sad to say that that's not the only time I've heard a story like that, where it's been that much of a silencing. But most of it is a running away from shame. And the hardest thing to accept, even though I'm going to say it, you're not going to believe me, but I'm going to say it anyway, is it's not about you. You are being put through this hell, and yes, you're impacted by it, but the reason it's happening is not because of you. The reason it's happening is because that person is broken in their shame, and they're avoiding responsibility, and they're avoiding facing their pain. So I hope that helps, just to hear that at least from somebody, that it's not your fault. And it's certainly nothing much that you can do about it until this person's willing to face their pain. I'm sorry you're going through that. We maybe get back to that if more people come up. Um, yeah, okay. Do we have any other questions that can come in, guys? Or we only a half an hour into the thing. I got a lot of thank yous. Appreciate that. Yeah, so children, there's a question here about children. Um, their children need therapy depending on their issues. When you have a children's a big category. So there's adult children, teenage children, you know how it goes, right? And one of the things I would put down is children are needing therapy as much as they have been involved. And there's two ways that children have been involved, either directly, so they've unfortunately discovered, let's say, dad looking at pornography on the computer or something like that, which is a direct impact onto them, or indirectly, which is they know something's up and they're internalizing that something's wrong in the house. Usually they're blaming themselves when that's happening. So there's a lot of problems that develop out of that. And and another thing that they do is they they look at mom and dad, maybe if they're home together, as having these problems as something wrong in them. So even if they don't know what's going on between mom and dad, or what dad's been or mom's been up to, whatever the case might be, they often need some form of therapy just to correct that internalization that they tend to do quite naturally as kids. So I would really put that to you is, if you're in a situation where a child is, do they need therapy? Well, one, first of all, is talk to them. Because we see kids here at the clinic as young as like 6, 7, 8 years old. Um, and, uh, and, a lot of times they're for their own presenting issues. But sometimes we have to see family units because the, you have to talk about the elephant in the room, and it's already been exposed. And you have to process out that painful awareness that the children have of what's been going on. And it's a horrible thing to have to go through. But if you don't do it in therapy, they're just going to do it through non-therapy ways. and those can sometimes be very dangerous. So do kids need therapy? Yes, they do. But depends on the situation, depends too on the age. If they're adult, they have to make their own decision. Obviously, if they're under 16, it's usually brought by a parent to therapy. And specialized depends on what the problem is. So a child can need specialized therapy. For instance, we're looking for a new hire for somebody who does addiction work like with gaming and things like that for youth, because that's a major area, video gaming as a major addiction for you young people. And there's often a cross addiction with pornography for these young kids. So specialized would matter depending on the presenting issue. Okay, so we have another one here. Someone is striving for 90 days of sexual sobriety. Any tips or advice to achieve it? Yeah, well, I'm going to say the cheeky thing, and one day at a time. That's the first thing. Do not try to do 90 days of anything. You will fail. 90 days is too much to envision in the mind, because when you're struggling and you picture that times 90, there's no strength that person has to manage that. So I would say break it down to, keeping track, but doing it one day at a time, and saying, okay, if I'm really in a pinch and I'm really feeling the urge, and I just don't know how I'm going to get by without giving in, just tell yourself, I won't die if I wait till tomorrow. I won't die if I wait till tomorrow. And that often can get you through the night. It can get you to the next day. And then, maybe you have a little bit of a break, or you're back into the same fight, and you have to tell yourself the same thing. I won't die if I wait till tomorrow. So what you're doing with the mind is, it's a little Jedi mind trick there. You're tricking the mind to say, I'm not saying no, I'm just saying not now. And sometimes that's all you need to get over the urge or that particular struggle that day. If you say outright no, sometimes it comes back because it's attached to your survival. It's attached to your instinct for survival. So when you say no, it's almost like saying, I'm cutting off all food. As soon as, what happens if people ever tried to fast, let's say for a blood test or for religious reasons or what have you, and then you start your fast, then you suddenly, all of a sudden, you want to eat everything, right? As soon as you're saying, I'm not going to have anything, then you want everything. And that happens for quite a few people. So saying absolutely no sometimes is a thing that will trick you into doing it. But if you go the other route and you just say, not today, not today, maybe tomorrow, but not today, then your brain says, all right, I'll let that go for now. But you're just kicking the can down the road, but at least it's helping you get through the day at that stage. Right? And I got lots more on that for future questions, but I think that answers the main thing here. Thank you for that comment. Okay, and see if I have another question after that. No, no, we made it to 7:05. This is free questions, guys. You don't have to pay for therapy right here, right? So, normally you're paying $3 a minute or something like that, right? So feel free to ask me a question. It doesn't cost you any money. Yeah, but those are good questions. Those are good questions. Okay, so there's a really good question. Thank you. So one of the things that came in is anniversaries. Now, this question, I believe, is in context of anniversaries of discoveries. And if that's the case, then that's a very important question. So discoveries are when a partner discovers about a secret sexual or other kind of behavior. And it can traumatize the partner to realize that they're in this situation and they didn't see it coming, or they denied their own gut because they did see it coming, and now they're upset at themselves. But that whole wounding that takes place, what happens in the mind, the way our brains work, is we're so ordered to thinking of time that things remind us of other things. And so that's why we have anniversaries and stuff like that, and is to remind ourselves of a previous time. So when there's an anniversary, unfortunately, um, if there's an anniversary or something like that, then basically what you're doing is you're having to change the anniversary into a new meaning. And so two things. First, you acknowledge the pain. You acknowledge that we're entering into a painful period. It was around this time a year, 2 years ago, what have you, when my terrible behavior was discovered. I want to get ahead of this and talk to you about it. And I'm talking as though I'm the addict talking to the partner. Um, and I want us to be able to plan something special for this time. If you want us to just avoid it like nothing happened, that's fine. But why don't we go and do something special and make it an anniversary of something new that we can do? So on one end, we're addressing it, we're not denying it, we are talking about it. And on the other side, we're building something new, a positive way to build the relationship up into a new direction. So it's both defense and offense, both protection and building. And that I would really recommend for anybody who's going to go into an anniversary experience to remember. So talk about it up front, get all the painful stuff out of the way ahead of time. Remember that it's a special day that you're going to have to be very careful around, but try to plan something more positive to also circle yourself around something new for the relationship when possible. That's usually not possible on the first anniversary, though. Just saying, it's very hard to do. Um, okay, some thanks. There's a question I don't fully understand. I want to know why. I want to know why will I ever, or is it not worth it? Okay. Well, I don't fully understand the question of is it not worth it or what that is, but what I will say, maybe you could send a clarifying question, but what I will say is um, nobody can tell you that you should stick around or that you should leave. And as a rule at the Whitestone Clinic, we do not tell people what to do. And the reason is it has to be your choice. And if we made a general anybody, and people like they love to give their advice, don't they? I mean, you start to share, open up with somebody, and they already have an opinion about how you're going to leave that person or whatever. That's projection. That's them and their own story putting it on you. But nobody should ever tell you what you should do. It's our job as therapists to point out some obvious blind spots, and then to say, now what do you want to do with that? But the agency is always yours, the client's. You're the agent of your own life, and that can be the agent of your own destruction if you choose to be that way, or the agent of your own deliverance. But you're the agent. Now, there's a clarifier. I want to know why he did it, or should I give up wanting to know? Very good. Okay, thank you. That does clarify the question. So when we're dealing with addicts themselves, the first question they always want to know is why? Why did I do it? And that's not the question, not first. The first question is, okay, how did I do it? How could I have crossed the line when the line was clear? I wasn't supposed to be sexual outside the marriage. I got sexual outside the marriage. How did I do that? And it's more of a how than a why. Why is like you can escape into these intellectual promenades into who knows what kind of thinking, and it may not answer really the problem. The problem is how did I do it? And I would say when you start to answer the how, the later behind it, the why becomes clear. The problem with this question is it's coming from a partner, and partners want to know why for a very different reason. They want to know why for protection. They want to know why to make sense of all the insanity that they're going through. But if you're waiting on it, what happens is that's a power dynamic. So while the partner is waiting for the addict to figure out the why or even to talk with them about it, they're sitting in limbo. I think the most important thing is to be able to say, I don't know. And how am I going to function not knowing? I don't have the answer, but I have to do something about it. So what am I going to do? And I would say you move on in a way, not that you make it a full declaration of divorce or something like that, which you might, but it's not what I'm saying. What you're saying is, I, I will not keep myself on hold for another person to get their stuff straight. So if you don't want to figure out why you did it, you don't want to talk to me about it, then I don't want to stick around and be at your disposal until you get around to it. So I'm going to choose certain actions in my own life to move myself forward. And when I start, here's the thing that'll happen, and I almost guarantee this. I'm not allowed to say a guarantee. I almost guarantee this. When you start showing that you have moved on, that you can move on, the avoidant person starts to feel the distance and they lose the power, and they often will try to get back involved. So until it's communicated, I really don't need you, then they will come around. But if you're sort of, I'm dependent and I need you, they see that as power, and they hold that stick that's between the both of you as a type of distancing, as a power stick. But when you walk away from that power stick, so it's not tension anymore and you're moving off, they will often go, what's happened to the stick? I need to get closer. And they will pursue. Okay. Now, if they're completely gone off the deep end already, they may not pursue, but that's at least now you know. But for the most part, the avoidant will start to pursue when the anxious person stops pursuing themselves. That's just a generic answer. I may not fit with the particulars of the question that was asked. Next question. My ex-girlfriend cheated on me 2 times during our relationship. Do you think that could have made my porn addiction worse? No, we can't find out. Because I started. Okay, yeah, there's more to the question. Hang on. Um, so I like started into different fetishes and things. Um, so those types of things are different fetishes. I'm going to talk about that in a second, okay? But when you are cheated on, what it does is it hits your deeper wounds. So we all carry around with us a constellation of wounds. And one of the problems with these wounds is when somebody steps on that wound, it hurts doubly because it's not just from the infraction that we just experienced, but it's like dropping a match into a keg of gunpowder. It explodes. And so all of the wounds are cumulatively brought back together into a big explosion. So when that happens, we usually cope unhealthily because if you're already dealing with a wound unhealthily, somebody gives you a new wound that's similar, like a rejection, okay? An example would be like when a person cheats on you, it's a form of being told, I'm not enough. I'm not good enough. I'm not good looking enough. I'm not whatever enough. Because if I was enough, technically the idea is you wouldn't go looking for it somewhere else. That's wrong thinking, by the way, but that's how people often think. And so you can then cope with sexual pursuits to escape that. And what are you getting? You're getting a proxy of what you just missed. So if you feel rejected, but you can go to pornography and the woman or whoever is looking into the camera who's showing you desire and seems to want you, even though it's not you in the film, that feels like acceptance. So what are you doing? You're taking the rejection you faced in real life, you're taking that away, and you're putting in a quasi, fake acceptance. And that's really what's going on. Now, fetishes, that's a different category. When you're dealing with a therapist who knows their stuff, you want to understand, well, now we understand what's behind the fetish. Okay. So swingers clubs, same sex stuff, or threesomes or whatever, when you are entering into those types of different angles of sexual templates, there's often something behind it. So a therapist can help you identify often a non-sexual origin, although sometimes it's sexual, but a non-sexual origin of why you're into that particular fetish. Okay. So one last thing I'll say about that is addicts like to blame other people. And if we say, I did this because somebody was bad towards me, that is escaping responsibility. And I'm sorry, I have to call a person out and say, if you're that person, it's time to man up. It's time to mature because you're responsible for your actions. No matter what other people did to you, what you do with your actions is on you. And we can't use it as an excuse. The other person hurt me, so that's why I did what I did. No, the other person hurt you and you felt moved towards doing what you did, but you also chose to do that. And now the choice is on you, not on the other person that hurt you. So that's my little preaching there for a second. Right? Um, and hopefully that was received well because this is a very awkward way to do things. Yeah, there's a specific question about a fetish, but I would ask the person to bring that up in individual therapy. Okay, we're not going to do that on the phone today or on this live thing today. Yeah, so there might be a good point here is when people are partners of sexual addicts are hurt, they need to reach out and connect with other people that themselves have um, the experience and you want to connect with them. So if you're not already connected, if you're not connected with another person, um, you have to be. You don't have to do it through group therapy, though it's good, it works, it helps, but you have to do it. You have to connect with other people who are suffering like you. And if you don't, you're just going to suffer needlessly on your own. So for CL, I'm just going to say to you, please reach out to us if you aren't already in a group or connected with other partners. We will connect you with somebody, okay? And I have permission to connect you with another partner if you needed to talk with somebody, but don't be on your own, okay? If you are on your own. Okay, so we're going through here. Um, okay, so here we go. So my wife and former boyfriend before us cheated or had a former boyfriend. Okay, my wife had a former boyfriend before us who cheated on her. Is it likely that she is bringing it into our relationship? The I'm not enough has come up already, just like to know how I can help her with this because I love her. Okay, it's sad to say, but a lot of partners have been through a series of relationships with cheating. When we see them, it's usually not the first partnership they've had, a relationship they had where they were betrayed. Now, they do not bring this on themselves, but we do bring up, and when one of our partner clients once said, I have to fix my picker or my radar. And what they mean by that is that, if there's a room of 1,000 people, they're going to go home with the addict. And there's just something in them that seems to be tuned in to finding the addict in the room. Well, that's a picker or a radar problem. So in that case, it's about selection of partners, but they don't bring it on themselves. They don't deserve it. No one deserves that behavior towards them. But when you've had already the experience of being hurt by another person, it's compounded by the more recent behaviors that would have happened. And so that's often a problem. And the wounds like I'm not enough, which is a lot of people's core wound problem, is certainly played upon, like I mentioned earlier, when a person's being cheated on. And yet, you know what the funny thing is, and I'll end on this point for this question. It's not because you're not enough. Most of the addicts I've seen, and I can say this honestly, they're married to beautiful women. And you would say, what a fool. Why would you leave or not be committed to a beautiful woman like that? Uh, Now, there's a bias in saying that. I'm using the sort of societal bias here because it's actually wrong to say that. You shouldn't be unfaithful, period, because you gave your word. But do you understand the meaning behind it? If it was that the person was not beautiful enough, Well, for the most cases I've seen, that has just never been the case. The woman is usually beautiful, but the addict is not after something better. They're just after anything that will get their fix. And I've seen them also go with very not good looking people against their wife or partner who is good looking. So it's not usually a case of someone being better. It's more about who's available and available in a non intimate way. And the non-intimacy is really what they're seeking. When you're with your partner, you see, and it's just you and that person, there's a kind of intimacy that has to happen for it to continue on. And it's inevitable when you're close together. But when you seek shallow intimacy, fake intimacy, you can't get that from your partner. So you go and you get it from a stranger. Because what do you got invested in a stranger? Nobody. What do you got invested in a prostitute? A few $100. That's it. So that's why you see people going that route, and um, they are the people that need to remember it's not about you not being good enough. It's about the other person not being healthy enough. Okay. All right, I'm just gonna go down to the bottom here. Somehow I end up way back at the top, so I got to screen all the way down through the bottom again. Okay, it's not showing up. Oh, one new message. Hang on. Okay, just some thanks. Okay. All right. Well, listen, we're getting near the end there, so I can take maybe one more question. Last chance at a questions, anybody? And then I'm just going to go with my closing spiel. Okay. Just reviewing to make sure I didn't forget anything. All right, so here's what I'm going to end with. Just first of all, I want to thank you guys for being part of this and for your questions that you've asked and for your patience and as I'm figuring out how to do this online. So I really do appreciate that. I am open to your constructive feedback. So if people want to send me an email or something that says, Michael, I like this, um, but what else can you do to make it better? Try this or try that. I'm open to your feedback. I would also be open for you guys to share the links when they do come up on our website with people you think would find the original topic I presented on more of an intro, kind of for newbies, that kind of thing. You can let them know about that. You can let them know about the clinic as well, the Whitestone Clinic, because one of the problems that we have at the Whitestone Clinic is we deal with intimacy disorders and personal traumas. And it's not the kind of thing people usually wear on their sleeve and go out in public and say, oh, you know what, I at a cocktail party or, well, whatever post-COVID parties were allowed, and say, me and my partner went through a terrible time with their pornography addiction. But we're much better. Like people don't bring that up over wine and cheese. So whereas other forms of therapy, you might bring it up. You might say, hey, I saw a good therapist and that kind of stuff. But usually we only get people referring us when somebody's been very vulnerable with them, and they said, you know what, you've told me about your husband stepping out on you. I have some knowledge of that. I can link you up with the Whitestone Clinic or something like that. So if you do have the situations, do bring them up. Oh, we have two last things because we're going to close in 5 minutes. Um, the last thing is it's a comment. Okay, sorry about that, guys. We're gonna have to work on this. Wait, okay, okay, no, two questions quickly. What time do you suggest people go to sleep at night? Um, Earlier the better. This is for especially if you're struggling with addiction. The idea is to get good sleep, period. So if a person can get 8 hours of sleep, it doesn't matter if you're sleeping midnight to 8 a.m. or you're sleeping 10 to 6 or something like that, but it's about how much sleep you get. And one of the things I would say to people is if it's undisturbed sleep or if it's toss and turning sleep, sometimes medication might be necessary. When people have gone through recent serious issues like grief and things like that, their sleep is negatively impacted. I would suggest that sometimes considering medication for a period of time is not a bad idea for at least those few months. But earlier is usually better because the longer you're up at night, the more temptation there is because the kids are asleep, you're alone, the computer's accessible, and so on. So earlier usually is better, but that's just an opinion. Um, okay, the last one here is what is the meaning behind Whitestone? Well, on our web page, you'll see about us, and there is a story, a long story about what is Whitestone, but the short of it is, and it's a good place to end. Whitestone is about victory. Whitestone is an ancient Near East symbol, a white stone that often represented a vote for innocence when people black pebbles were for guilt and white stones were for innocence. Um, Sometimes there were different forms of white stones like tesserae, so tiles that were used a little bit like Olympic medal or Olympic credit card that you can go around and you show your little white stone and you'd get free meals and stuff like that. There's all kinds of things. But in the end, what it really comes down to is a symbol of victory. So we just took a symbol of victory and we named us the Whitestone Clinic. So, well, that's it for me right now, guys. I just want to thank you all again. And, it is awkward to speak to my computer and see blank profiles and all that kind of stuff, but I respect your anonymity. If you have feedback for me, I'm going to ask you to please send that to me privately through our email, either at contact at whitestone.clinic or to send it to me directly at mbrowning, so M as in Michael, Browning dot Whitestone at gmail.com. So I will gladly receive your praises, your criticisms, or your whatevers. And for everybody, thank you. Have a good night, and please take care of yourself. Hopefully nothing triggered you too much in this talk, but if it did, do some self-care and be healthy. See you next week. And by the way, you're welcome to come back next week. You don't have to stay for the Q&A. We might be talking about things like the difference between psychiatry, psychology, psychotherapy, counseling, and coaching, as well as insurance coverage. So those are some of the topics coming up. If you really wanted to, you can just book with us online now. They're already set up, I believe, ahead of time. And reach out to us with any ideas you have. If you want a specific topic to be talked about, I will take your recommendations and plan it into one of these future talks. It's free, it's weekly, at least as long as we can keep it up, and invite your friends or invite other people you know. Okay? All right, guys, I'm hanging up. Thank you very much. Have a great evening.